Forest Gate, East London, Friday 29 August 2003. Two men, Amajit Singh Tiwana, his nephew Rajinder Singh Tiwana. They were at the family hotel. A van blocked a narrow lane. Horns began to sound. Words were exchanged. One man drove away. He came back minutes later. He carried a small black bag. A burst of automatic gunfire tore through the afternoon. Why did a tiny parking row become daily? To help us continue making sure these stories are heard, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it.
On a late August afternoon in 2003, a narrow lane behind a modest family hotel in Forest Gate felt like any other suburban street in East London. The sun was high, people were leaving Friday prayers, and the business of running a small hotel continued in the ordinary way. The Forest View Hotel on Romford Road belonged to a family who had worked there for years. Brothers and cousins ran it together. They lived close by, and the hotel was a hub of their daily lives. Among them were Amajit Singh Tiwana, a 52-year-old businessman known locally for his quiet manner, and his nephew Rajinder Singh Tiwana, who various reports list as a young man in his mid-20s to mid-30s. The exact age reported for Rajinder varies in contemporary coverage, a detail that would be noted and repeated by reporters for years to come. On that Friday, the Tiwanas were loading or unloading a van outside the hotel when a dark blue Volkswagen Golf and a green Honda Civic blocked the narrow mews. Access to the back of the hotel was cut off. Horns began to sound. Guests and drivers became impatient. Amajit stepped outside and moved the van to allow one of the cars to pass. One of the motorists drove away without incident. The other stayed. Words were exchanged, voices rose, and a brief argument broke out. Neighbors later described seeing the Golf driver push Rajinder in the chest. It was, by many accounts, a petty, combustible moment born of daily frustration over a blocked lane, and in such a place it might have ended there. Instead, the man who had been arguing, identified in time as Muhammad Ayub Khan, drove away. Witnesses would later recall that he left on foot or in his car, but the crucial fact was that he returned minutes later, not alone. Around 10 or 15 minutes after the first confrontation, three young men came back. They were described as casually dressed, wearing hooded tops, and moving with the kind of anonymity that hoods and afternoon crowds can provide. They began to smash the Tiwana's van. The family ran out to confront them. What happened next is the moment the ordinary became terrible. One of the three men produced a small black bag. From that bag came a submachine pistol, a weapon that reporters later described as a MAC-10, an Uzi-style automatic pistol, a compact instrument designed to spray bullets in a short burst. It is the kind of weapon that turns a street argument into a scene of tragedy. There are differences in how many rounds were reported. Several press accounts and the court record suggest roughly 10 rounds were fired. Others say a short burst, and some say multiple rounds. What is not ambiguous is the result. Amajit and Rajinder were hit. They were pronounced dead at the scene. The daughter of Amajit, Harjinder, a woman in her mid-20s, watched from behind a wall as the attack unfolded. By her own account, the gunman turned the weapon towards her, but either the gun jammed or it failed to fire, and she survived. She later told police and a court that she would never forget the face of the man who had murdered her father. The attackers fled immediately. Witnesses described them pulling up their hoods and running through Norwich Road, across Romford Road, and into Marjorie Park Road, where they may have got into a parked vehicle and driven off. The scene that followed was a sudden, stunned silence. Neighbors came out, people called emergency services, and the hotel that had been full of life a few minutes before became a crime scene. The police cordoned off the area, and a local investigation began that would stretch for years. Detectives described the killings as cold-blooded, and they appealed to the public for help. Early on, the investigation focused on those three men and the weapon, which was not recovered at the scene. Metropolitan Police officers announced a reward of £10,000 for information leading to conviction, and in 2000 for the suspect who had apparently returned with the gun was put on the Met's most wanted list. Detective Superintendent Maureen Boyle and later Detective Inspector Andrew Yates became public faces of the inquiry. Yates described the two unidentified companions as casually dressed young men in hooded tops, late teens or early 20s, and repeated an appeal for anyone with information to come forward. Investigators followed the threads available to them. Witness statements identified one man as the likely gunman. Mobile phone records added a detail that would recur in reporting. The suspect had repeatedly phoned a man named Abu Bakr Manshar, whose own profile would later include a separate conviction for plotting to kill a decorated British soldier. Manshar was arrested in connection with other matters in 2003 and convicted in a separate case in 2006. Police recorded the calls as a potential line of inquiry, and reporters noted the possibility that those who had contacts in other networks might have helped the suspect escape. Press coverage also identified a worrying fact, namely that the same model of weapon had been used in a different shooting in Coventry in 2003, which raised questions about how such a lethal weapon had been circulating on the streets. In the immediate aftermath, the trail of the suspect went cold. He disappeared from the reach of British investigators. For years the case remained on the public record, part cold file and part continuing appeal. The family of the dead men tried to continue the business and their lives, but the loss left a long shadow. Harjinder remained one of the primary witnesses, and the family spoke publicly about the fear they felt, including the daughter's fear of returning to the hotel. The community was shaken. Neighbors described the Tawanas as hard-working, community-oriented people who had owned the hotel for about a decade. Some neighbors spoke of ongoing local problems with drug dealing and street prostitution nearby, a context police said they would explore. None of those threads explained why two men with family and business responsibilities had been gunned down over a parking spat. The case waited until a break years later. In August 2010, Bangladeshi authorities detained a man in Dhaka after identifying him on local records. Reporting varied on precise dates and small details, but most news agencies agreed that a man believed to be Ayub Khan had been arrested by Bangladeshi police on or around August 5, 2010, at or near the Shah Jalal International Airport. He had travelled to Bangladesh from Pakistan, reportedly to visit a friend in the Sylhet region. Police there said he would be extradited to Britain through proper channels, and within weeks British authorities had moved to secure his return. The arrest was described in Wire reporting as the result of tracing the suspect's presence on local databases, a routine but crucial combination of local policing and international cooperation. Back in the United Kingdom, the file that had been open since 2003 suddenly moved again. Khan was formally extradited to Britain and charged in October 2010. The authorities presented a case that relied heavily on witness identification and on the reconstruction of the events. Harjinder's identification of the suspect as the man she had seen in 2003 became central to the prosecution. Mobile phone records, witness testimony from people at the scene, and investigative work that had taken place over the intervening years were set against the defence's arguments. The trial opened at Woolwich Crown Court and built around the ordinary moments that had been captured on that day: the horn, the shove, the bag, the burst of gunfire that ended two lives. The jury considered the evidence and on December 12, 2011 delivered a unanimous verdict. Muhammad Ayub Khan was found guilty of the double murder of Amajith and Rajinder, and guilty of the attempted murder of Harjinder. The courtroom responded with audible distress when the verdicts were read. The judge, Mr. Justice Saunders, described the killings in sentencing as brutal, cold-blooded and pointless. The prosecutor, Nicholas Hilliard, had told the court that the victims were two good, blameless men, and that their deaths had arisen from an argument so minor that it made the use of such lethal force almost incomprehensible. Khan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 26 years before he could be considered for parole. That sentence reflected not only the loss felt by the family, but also the court's assessment of the senselessness of the crime. In the public gallery, family members wept. The family issued statements of grief, and the community took in the stark contrast between the ordinary business of the hotel and the violence that had visited it. Even after conviction, some questions remained. The two other men who had been with Khan that day were not identified in court and, in the public record, remained the subject of appeals. The Mac 10 used in the attack was never recovered in the immediate police operation, and police continued to publish appeals asking for information about the weapon. Small details in press reporting also diverged. Contemporary reports differed on whether the shootings had occurred on 28 or August 29, 2003, though most and the court record indicate the day was Friday, August 29, 2003. Some outlets reported Rajinder's age as 25, others as 35. Spelling variants of the suspect's name appeared across articles, which is common in long-running cases where names are transcribed from different sources. These inconsistencies did not affect the core narrative, but they mattered for the record, and they mattered to a family that wanted a precise account of their loss. The case also raised larger, unresolved questions about how lethal weapons find their way onto British streets, why a dispute over a parking place could escalate so completely, and how a community can recover after such a violent rupture. Police and local leaders reflected on the ease with which a routine civic irritation became a fatal encounter. Investigators pointed to the role of mobile phone evidence and to the persistent need for public assistance in tracing accomplices, and they continued to invite anyone with information to contact Crime Stoppers or the Metropolitan Police. For the Tijuana family, the conviction offered a measure of accountability, but it could not restore 2 lives or erase the trauma of a daughter who had watched her father die. In the years that followed, the Forest Gate killings became a cautionary tale about violence and escalation. Journalists and commentators revisited the facts to remind the public and policymakers that the availability of automatic weapons, even compact models like the MAC-10, transforms conflicts and community disputes in catastrophic ways. The conviction of one man closed a chapter, but the unanswered questions about the missing weapon and the whereabouts or identities of the 2 companions left a lingering afterword. The legal system had delivered a verdict, but the social, cultural, and criminal contexts that allowed such a weapon to be used on a suburban street remained a subject for inquiry. For the family, the day remains an anniversary of loss. Harjinder's voice, recorded in court and in interviews, remained a central human element in the story. Her words, simple and direct, captured the bewilderment of those left behind. "I will never forget the face of the man who murdered my father," she said in court. That phrase, repeated in multiple reports, became an enduring human detail in a case that might otherwise have been a collection of dates and legal findings. The lives of Amarjit and Rajinder were described by friends and neighbors as steady, community-focused, and hard-working. Their deaths, over something as minor as a blocked lane, forced a small community to confront how fragile everyday life can be when a single moment becomes a decision to use a weapon. The Forest Gate case also demonstrated the slow arcs of justice in complex, cross-border cases. It showed how investigations can remain unresolved for years, how suspects can move across borders, and how international cooperation between police forces can eventually bring a suspect back to face trial. It showed the importance of witness testimony, even when many years pass between the crime and the court hearing. It showed the limits of closure, as appeals for information continue and some threads remain open. In the end, the story is a study in human choices. A horn, a shove, a heated exchange, a decision to return, a bag opened, a burst of gunfire. 2 families destroyed, a daughter left with an indelible memory, a hotel that would never be the same. The conviction of Muhammad Ayub Khan answered part of the case, but the echoes of that summer afternoon in 2003 remain in the lives touched by the violence, and in the open requests from police for anyone who still holds information about the 2 other men or the missing weapon to come forward. The details, the names, the dates, and the gaps are now part of the public record. They form the chronology that guides any telling of what happened behind the Forest View Hotel on that August afternoon, and they shape the questions we still ask about armed violence on our streets.
Researchers have studied 2 things that matter most here: how illegal small arms move and how ordinary disputes escalate, and what stress does to witnesses. Reports by the UK Home Office and international researchers show illegal firearms often travel through organized channels, sometimes via converter replica or blank firing guns, and can circulate for years before recovery. Security analysts also note that the UK's firearms rate is linked to other criminal markets and that adaptability in supply routes matters to how weapons reach streets. Psychologists who study conflict escalation, including work by Zaid Winstock and others, show that brief verbal fights frequently amplify into physical violence when people return to settle disputes, when groups reappear together, or when status and reputations are involved. Small triggers can produce large rapid escalation. Memory scientists emphasize that trauma changes what witnesses recall. Extreme stress often strengthens memory for the central gist while making peripheral details less reliable. The same research shows repeated interviews and suggestion can alter recall, which is why investigators corroborate eyewitness testimony with phone records and forensics. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. See you next time on another episode.